This is a General Electric model P780. This radio was originally made in 1958, and then there's a number of different suffixes, P70 A, B, C, D, all the way up to H. On these radios, there was originally a label on the inside of the battery door here that would have identified what model this was, but they often go missing because they get damaged from leaking batteries. But anyways, it's kind of a neat old radio, and it works perfectly. And I've actually decided I'm going to do a little short video, just going to be about how to identify whether or not you've got a P780 A, B, C, D, E, F, or G, or H. The Model 780 was introduced in 1958. This was at a time when the transistor was the newest miracle in the electronics world, the advent of the transistor to replace the formerly used vacuum tubes, or if you're in England, valves as they were called over there. So prior to the advent of the transistor, radios used these very hot and inefficient devices called vacuum tubes. That made the radios use a lot of power, which made it difficult to have long battery life and portability due to weight issues. That being said, this being a transistor radio is actually pretty hefty. Part of the reason why this thing's so heavy is because it operates off of 6 D-sized or flashlight batteries. The 6 1.5 volt cells in series gives you a total of 9 volts. 9 volts was a standard, the advent of the 9 volt transistor battery, which if I had one here to show you for those kids out there who have no idea what I'm talking about. 9 volt transistor battery came along. It's right in the name, transistor. 9 volts was the standard voltage that was needed to get the transistors to operate correctly. So there was a standard that was settled on. So what they did here was, by using 6 D-sized cells in series, they've got a lot more bang for their buck as far as longevity of how long the batteries will last in this radio. The reason why they came out, GE came out with the Model 780, which is a pretty robust portable transistor radio, is because around this time when the transistor was invented, everybody started coming out with portable transistor radios, and a lot of the portable transistor radios that came out early on were kind of lackluster in performance. Some might say that they were even kind of rushed to market in order to just showcase, look at this great new technology we have here that allows these radios to be shrunk down into this very small size. And GE, they basically said, what we want is we want a radio that is going to perform as well as, or even outperform the standard vacuum tube radios of portable radios of that time frame, many of which are loosely collected into a group called the All-American 5, which I believe is because they used a very specific layout of 5 particular vacuum tubes. So first of all, do you have a P780? That alone can be difficult because of the fact that the label was on the back side of the battery door here, and that paper label often would be damaged from battery acid leakage from batteries being left in there and the radio being put away with old batteries in it. So you take this cover off, and if you've got no label on the back side of this cover, then okay, well, you're going to have to figure out what it is some other way. Hopefully you were lucky enough to get to this point and know that you at least know you have a 780 based on the fact that just the way this radio looks, the coloring of the cabinet. The later 783s have a darker brown cabinet and quite a few differences from this radio, so we won't even talk about that one. So let's start with the oldest in the series, the P780A. The P780A needs to have the words 8 transistor on the front. No antenna on the top. No cutout here with terminals marked G and A, which are for ground and antenna. So no ground and antenna terminals on the back. Note on the battery door, there's a rivet right here. This rivet is to attach this plastic strap that goes behind the batteries to aid in removal of the batteries. So that's the P780A, has no rivet here, no antenna terminals, no antenna on the top, and says 8 transistor on the front. The P780B is exactly what I just described, with one exception. They added this rivet to attach this strap. So P780B has no antenna terminals on the back, no antenna on the top, says 8 transistor on the front, and has this rivet. The P780C, I was not able to find any data on. It almost as if it never existed. Was not able to find any radios that are P780Cs, nor was I able to find any schematic diagrams or any information on that radio. So it almost appears like that was never issued by GE. Who knows? The P780D, what they did when they got to the D was they added these terminals on the back for ground and antenna. So for it to be a P780D, you have to have the ground and antenna terminals on the back, the rivet on the battery door, and no antenna on the top, and the words 8 transistor are still on the front. The P780 models E and F are identical except for one difference. So let's start with the 780E. The 780E is identical to the 780D, except here on the D where it says 8 transistor, the E says General Electric. So that means this model right here, because it does not have an antenna on the top, but it has the terminals on the back, the rivet on the battery door, GE on the front. This is either an E or possibly an F. The way you determine that, the difference is, on the bottom here, see these screws right here? These screws actually hold the battery compartment to the back of the radio. So when you take the back of the radio off, the battery compartment wants to basically stay with the back. On the on the E, there are 5 screws to hold that compartment in. On the F, which is what this is, there are 3 screws. So the A, B, C, D, and E all had 5 screws here. The F was the first model where they went to 3 screws here. All that's left are the G and the H. The Model G is easy to distinguish because the Model G has a whip antenna and an antenna switch, and the bottom has 3 screws. So there'd be an antenna on the top and then a switch on the back for the antenna, and then the 3 screws for that battery compartment. And lastly, the Model 780H is the same as the Model F, but the front grille says General Electric long range. So it'll say General Electric long. I forgot one important thing. When you get to the Model F, one of the other differences between the Model F and the Model E and all the versions before that, so in other words, the A through E also should have the Conelrad marks. Con, E-L-R-A-D. I don't remember exactly what that stands for, but there was a period of time in the United States between 1953 and 1963 when almost all radios manufactured in the United States included civil defense markings on the radio dial at the civil defense standard radio frequencies. So at 640 kilohertz and 1240 kilohertz, you would have a small white or red triangle to indicate that those are the 2 positions on the dial where the civil defense radio frequencies could be found in the event of a nuclear attack. This was the Cold War era. Everybody was convinced that it was just a matter of time before the Russians were going to blow us off the face of the earth. So that's an interesting little tidbit there. You may or may not find interesting. Even the production dates are kind of sketchy on this. They designed the radio back in 1958, but I don't think that anybody has found any versions with date codes prior to 1959. It was designed in 58, but I guess actual production didn't start until 59. Also, keep in mind that this guide is very loose. You're going to find exceptions to the rule, And the way that those are generally explained by most collectors is that those were probably transitional radios. In other words, if they were getting ready to make a change from an A to the B or the B to the C, they might have had a certain amount of parts already produced to continue making some more B's, but they wanted to change over to the C. So, next thing you know, you find that, all of a sudden you've got one model that shouldn't have the antenna terminal hole, but it does. Something like that. Okay? So I hope you found this guide helpful and interesting. Hope you enjoy your Model 780 GE radio. It's a real nice little blast from the past.